Hello and welcome to the next BriefingsDirect Enterprise Architecture Thought Leadership Panel discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at InterArber Solutions, and I'll be your host and moderator as we examine how a global standards body is working to improve how the healthcare industry functions. We'll now hear how the Open Group's Healthcare Forum is advancing best practices and methods for better leveraging IT in healthcare ecosystems. And we'll learn more about how the Health Reference Architecture Initiative and its role in standardizing IT architectures fosters boundaryless interoperability across and between healthcare, public, and private sector organizations. With that, please join me now in welcoming our panel of experts. We're here with Oliver Kipf. He's the Open Group Healthcare Forum Chairman and Business Process and Solution Architect at Philips, and he's based in Germany. Welcome, Oliver.
Hi, thanks a lot.
We're also here with Dr. Jason Lee. He's Director of the Healthcare Forum at the Open Group based in Boston. Hello, Dr. Lee.
Hi, Dana. Thank you.
Lastly, we're also here with Gail Kalbfleisch. She's Director of the Federal Health Architecture at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Gail.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, let's see, Jason, let's start at a high level for our audience, those who might not be that familiar with the Healthcare Forum and even the Open Group in general. Tell us a little bit about why the Healthcare Forum exists, what's its mission, and what do you hope to achieve through your work in healthcare industry advancement?
Sure. The Healthcare Forum exists because there's a huge need in the healthcare enterprise, which is approaching a fifth of the GDP of the economy in the U.S. and approaching that in other developed countries in Europe. There is a general feeling that enterprise architecture is somewhat behind in our industry relative to other industries, and that there are important gaps to fill that will help those stakeholders in healthcare, whether they're in hospitals or healthcare delivery systems or innovation hubs and organizations of different sorts, consulting firms and so on, to leverage IT to achieve business goals. That's through the use of best practices, lessons learned, and the accumulated wisdom of the various forum members over many years of work that understand how to develop the program of our work so that it can address the value needs that these different organizations and stakeholders have. So our mission is simply that. It's to help make healthcare information available when and where it's needed, and to accomplish that goal through architecting the healthcare enterprise.
Great. Oliver, as the chairman of the forum, maybe you could explain what a forum is. What's it consist of? How many organizations are involved? Just so people understand a bit more about how the organization functions.
Yeah, good question. Thanks a lot. The forum itself is really made of its members, and we have members, and I'm really proud of this team, and we are very passionate about healthcare from all corners of the healthcare universe, be it that we are in the tech business, be it that we are more from the governing bodies, be it that we also have participation from the provider community. So it's really that mix, and the forum itself is true to the nature of the Open Group. We are global in nature. We are vendor neutral. I dare say we are very business-oriented, so I really call it, we go from strategy to execution, and we want to bridge from business to technology. And we take that foundation of the Open Group and apply this to the forum. We are, as we have many health standards out there, we really want to use and leverage on that, making standards work, so to provide the right set of tools, frameworks, and approaches. This is where we are. And we've got members from, I don't know, Jason, 30 members or from all across, isn't it?
Approximately, yes.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that you ask about the partners as well, because we do partner a lot into the industry. You get to understand that the healthcare industry as such is really a crowded place, and there are many standards development organizations. There are many players in this field, and it's quite vital that as a forum in such a vertical as we are in the healthcare industry, we need to reach out, we need to collaborate, we need to engage with others out there to really reach where we want to be.
Great. Gail, of course, is a very complex field, lots of payers and providers and organizations. Why is the role of the enterprise architecture function an important ingredient to help bring this together a bit more, in an interoperable sense? What's important about EA when we think about the healthcare industry?
From an EA perspective or an enterprise architecture perspective, I don't really think that it matters whether you're talking about the, quote, healthcare industry or the finance industry or the personnel industry or the gas, electric. If you look at any of those, the organizations or the companies that tend to be highly functioning, they have not just an architecture, because quite frankly everyone has an architecture for what they do, but that architecture is documented and it's available for use by decision makers, by developers across the system, so that each part can work well together. And we know that within the healthcare industry it is exceedingly complicated, and it's quite frankly, it's a mixture of a lot of different things. It's not just your body, and it's not just your doctor. It's also your insurance, your payers, it's your research, it's academia, putting all of those together. And if we don't have an enterprise architecture where people new to the system or people who are deeply embedded in their part of the system, if they can't see how that system all works together usefully, let's say, for example, what Oliver just said, a lot of different standards organizations. If we don't see how all of that's working together and where everybody else is working and how to make it fit, we're going to have a hard time getting to that point of interoperability quickly and efficiently.
Oliver, maybe just to add to that, I mean, if you think of that healthcare industry, we've been very good in the healthcare industry in developing individual solutions to a specific problem. And there's a lot of innovation and there's a lot of technology we use. But there's an inherent risk of really producing silos. And I believe it's very important that we get from this individual solution and solution building blocks to a more integrated approach based on architecture building blocks, based on common frameworks, tools, and approaches.
Healthcare is a very complex environment, and IT is very fast-paced, a lot of change. Can you give us an update on what the Healthcare Forum has been doing, given the difficulty of managing such a complex amount of variables?
The Healthcare Forum has started with a series of work papers, of white papers, initially focusing on an information model that has a long history in the federal government. We used enterprise architecture to evaluate that. It's one of multiple models, and we got traction. People started to listen, and we started to talk to people outside of the open group and outside of the normal channels of the open group. We talked to different types of architects, information architects, solution architects, engineers, and initially settled on the problem that is essential to the open group, and that is the problem of boundaryless information flow. The need to get beyond the silos that Oliver mentioned and that Gail alluded to. As I mentioned in my opening comments, this is a huge industry, and Gail illustrated it by naming some of the stakeholders. And even within an organization, if you think of your hospital, it can be difficult to achieve boundaryless information flow, to enable information to travel digitally, securely, quickly, and in a way that's valid and reliable and understandable. by those who send it and by those who receive it. And all that's to the betterment of the patient. So in our focus initially on what healthcare folk call interoperability, what the Open Group calls boundaryless information flow, we came to realize through discussions with various stakeholders in the public sector as well as the private sector and globally, that understanding, as Gail said, how the different pieces are linked together is critical. And anybody who works in an organization or belongs to a church or a school or a family understands that sometimes getting the right message, getting the message communicated from point A to point B can be difficult. And to address that issue, the forum has decided, the members have decided, to create a health enterprise reference architecture that is essentially a framework and a map at the highest level that can help people see how what they do relates to what others do, regardless of their position in their company. We want to deliver the value to those people of helping them to understand how their work is interconnected and how IT can deliver leverage to achieving those goals they have.
Oliver, perhaps you could go in a little bit more deeply and explore the Open Group Healthcare Forum. Who should be aware and explore it? Who should be using it? And also how this reference architecture can be used. Who should be aware of what you're all doing out there?
Good question. Thanks a lot. To me, to start with, really, it's the members of the Open Group themselves. We get so many members in the Open Group, and many of them are players in the field of healthcare, and so they are the natural candidates to really engage with it. But think about also the many players and decision makers that we have in that vast health ecosystems. And we've got providers, we've got payers, governing bodies, we've got pharmaceuticals, we've got health tech companies, and to me it's really those who are in the planning and management, into architecting, into making that big thinking reality out there. The decision makers, those are the ones, to me, the prime candidates for engagement in the healthcare forum. And quite frankly, it's obviously the kind of products we produce. And Jason was mentioning the reference architecture. One of these and the white papers we have that we would like them to offer so they can use it. So in a nutshell, it's really the members, and it's the healthcare industry and the healthcare ecosystem that we are targeting it.
Great. Gail, perhaps you could address the reference architecture initiative. Why do you see that as important, and who do you think should be aware of it and maybe contribute to it?
A reference architecture is one of those building block pieces that should be used as, you can call it a template, so we can have words that other people can relate to maybe easier than the architecture speak. But if you take that template and you make it available to other people so that we can all be designing our processes or our systems or have an understanding of our information exchange so that it can, as Jason says, it can cross boundaries easily and securely. If we are running from the same template, that's going to enable us to identify how do we start, what has to be included, what standards are we going to use. So a reference architecture is really one of those very important pieces that not only is it a list of how we want to do things and we agree to it, but it's one of those that every organization doesn't have to start from scratch, and it can be reused and improved upon as we go through the work. As someone improves the architecture, that can come back into the reference architecture. Who should know about it? Decision makers, developers, medical device innovators, people who are looking to improve the way information flows within any health sector, whether it's Oliver in Europe, whether it's someone over in California, Australia, it really doesn't matter. It's anyone who wants to make interoperability better should know about it. My focus is on decision makers, policy makers, process developers, Other people's looks at it will be from a device design perspective, so to speak. And one of the things that I know has been discussed in reference to the reference architecture has been needing to make sure that it's a high enough picture where we can agree on what it looks like and how we can see it from the big picture point of view, but yet goes down far enough so that people can then apply it to what they're doing, whether it's designing a piece of software or designing a medical device.
Great, thank you. Jason, of course, the Open Group has been involved with standards and reference architectures for decades, with such recent initiatives as the IT for IT approach, as well as the TOGAF reference architecture. How is the health reference architecture, or HERA as it's referred to, different from some of these other architectural initiatives?
Well, it starts by using the HERA starts by using the essential components and insights that are built into the TOGAF architectural development model, the ADM, and builds from there. It uses the Archimate language, but we have never felt restricted to using only those existing Open Group models that have been around for some time and are currently, being developed further. We're a big organization in terms of our approach, our forum is, and so we want to draw the best there is in order to fill the gaps that exist. And it's simply the case that when the various forums in the Open Group have developed architectural models and standards as horizontal forums, as it were, these apply across multiple industries. As we have dug deep into the healthcare industry, what we've found is that there are issues, gaps that need filling, and topics that would benefit from going broader. And to do that, we've really been working quite hard to establish relationships with other organizations in the healthcare space to bring them in to collaborate. We've done this with HL7, which is the best-known standards organization in the world. We're doing this now with an organization called HSPC, which involves academic, government, and hospital organizations, as well as people who are focused on developing standards around terminology, for example.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about such a reference architecture, and again, it's very important to understand that we are talking about a specific domain. We are in the healthcare industry. So if you look at your customers, health enterprises, we are those really concerned with the delivery of health services. You need to ask yourself the question, what is their needs? And the need in that industry is it's really that focus on the person, focus on the service. But it's also very highly regulatory. Compliance is a big thing. Quality is a big thing. The idea of lifetime evolution, that you become better and better all the time, that is very important, very intrinsic to the industry. The other thing that I would like to add is, when we were looking into the customers really out there that we believe that the HERA could be of value, it's the small, the mid, and the large enterprises that you have to think of, and it's really across the globe. And that's why we believe that the HERA itself is something that is tuned into the needs of our industry. And as Jason mentioned, we build upon and we leverage standards where we can, like Archimate is one of the big ones that we use as the underlying, not only the business language we use, but also a lot of the concepts that are based on Archimate. But we need to include other standards as well, obviously those from the healthcare industry, and we need to deviate from specific standards where this is of value to our industry.
Oliver, in order to get this standard to be something that's used, it's very practical, people look to results. So if you were to take advantage of such a reference architecture as HERA, what should you expect to get back? If you do it right, what are the payoffs?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, immediately what comes to my mind is really that it should enable you to do a better job, to become more efficient, to make better use of technology. So there are the kind of benefits that you see realizing, and it's not only that you have a place where you can model all the elements of your enterprise, where you can put and manage your processes and your services, but it's also a way of doing, way of architecting your enterprise. It gives you the ability, if you think from a transformation management perspective, and we know that in many healthcare systems, we have great challenges ahead of us, that there is this need to change, and the Health Enterprise Reference Architecture gives you the tool to get where you want to be, but define where you want to be, also how to get there. So this is where we believe it gives a lot of benefit.
Gail, similar question. For those organizations, both public and private sector, that do this well, that embrace the reference architecture, what should they hope to get in return?
Well, I'd first like to echo what Oliver said. I completely agree with what he said. And to add slightly to it is one of the benefits that you get from using enterprise architecture is a chance to have a perspective from outside your own narrow silo. And the reference architecture should be able to help that person see other areas that they have to take into consideration that maybe they wouldn't have taken into consideration for. Another value would be to engage with other people who are doing similar work, who may have either learned lessons or is doing the same thing at the same time. So that's one of the ways I see the effectiveness and doing our job better, quicker, faster would fall into place. Also, it can help us identify where we have gaps and where we need to focus our efforts, as well as those areas of identifying, that's pretty well defined right there. We don't really need to mess with that area. And so it can help us focus our limited resources in much better ways on specific issues where we can get accomplished what we're looking to get accomplished to have that boundaryless information flow.
I would just add to that, and then I look forward to your next question. Complete agreement with my colleagues. Essentially, the answer to me is it enables, the HERA will provide a framework that will enable companies to leverage IT to achieve their goals. And the wonderful thing about it is that we're not telling organizations what their goals should be. We're showing them how they can follow a roadmap to accomplish those goals more effectively. Often this involves communicating the big picture, like Gail said, to those who are in siloed positions in their organizations. There's an old saying, what you see depends on where you sit. And the HERA enables anyone to understand the relationships, for example, between business processes and engineering. And so whether a stakeholder's interest is increasing patient satisfaction, reducing error, improving quality, having better patient outcomes, and gaining more reimbursement in countries where reimbursement is tied to outcomes, all of these goals are helped by using the product, the architecture that we're developing.
Great. So, Jason, for those who are intrigued by what you're doing with HERA, tell us a little bit about its trajectory, its evolution, how that journey unfolds, and where perhaps they could learn more and get involved.
We've only been working on the HERA per se for the last year, although its underpinnings go back 20 years or more. Its trajectory is not to a single point, but to an evolutionary process. We'll be producing products white papers as well as products that others can use to, in a sort of modular fashion, leverage the models that they already use within their legacy systems, and they add to following this framework. So we encourage anyone out there, particularly in the delivery space, in the health system delivery space, to join us. That can be done by contacting me. I'm sure we'll have time to give our email addresses at the end of this conversation, and get involved. It's a critical time and a very opportune time for key players to be involved, because we're making very important decisions, we're collaborating with very important players, and we're laying down the tracks from which we will build increasing levels of complexity. But we start, as Gail said at the top, using non-architectural language to be able to talk to decision makers, whether they're in the public sector or private sector. So we invite all those people to join us, or any of those people to join us.
If I could add on to that.
Please.
So an interesting aspect is that my first foray into working with or being associated with the Open Group was long before I was in the health IT sector. It was when I was with the Air Force, and we were doing very non-health architecture work in conjunction with the Open Group. The interesting part to me is that boundaryless information flow in a manner that is consistent with ensuring that the information flows where it needs to go, so who has access to it, how does it get from place to place across distinct mission areas or distinct business areas, when that is not necessarily, the information is not used the same way or stored the same way between those business areas, is not a question or is not a problem that is isolated just to health. It's across all of the business areas. What was exciting was that I was able to take awareness of the Open Group from a previous life, so to speak, and engage with them through a friend to get involved in the healthcare forum from my current position. And we need to understand that a lot of the technical problems that we have in exchanging information, regardless of what industry you sit in, have been addressed by other people and have been worked on. And by leveraging organizations that have already worked on it, such as Jason said, for 20 years we've been working on this in one way or another, in one area or another, we can leverage that work and the things that have been learned within the healthcare industry, and we don't have to make the same mistakes that were made before. And we can take what people have learned and extend it that much further. And we can do that best by working together in areas like the Open Group's Healthcare Forum.
And on that evolutionary approach, and I also see this as a long-term journey, and yes, there will be releases, and we will have a specification, there will be guidelines, but it's important that this is an engagement, that inclusion of customers in the future once we have it released. And you can even think of things, of aspects like country-specific flavors, and it's really they're coming together to team up. That really makes a great reference architecture. And let's face it, the reference architecture is a fairly high level, so we would expect much more detailed and concrete implementation architecture to spin off a reference architecture such as the HERA.
Can I give one very concrete example? And it doesn't quite follow your question, but just for the audience to understand the range, I'm going to provide bookends of the kinds of problems that can be addressed using the HERA. At the micro end, let's say, a hospital, as our one of our colleagues in Norway has done, a hospital can actually use the HERA structure to implement a patient check-in into the hospital, not for all patients, but for patients who would like to bypass the usual process and check themselves in. This has a number of positive value outcomes for the hospital in terms of HR and in terms of patient satisfaction and cost savings. At the other extreme, suppose a large hospital system is in Philadelphia or in Stuttgart or in Oslo or in India, wants to have patients, or finds itself, not so much wants to, but finds itself with patients appearing at the emergency room or in the ambulatory settings affiliated with the hospital. And rather than come as a blank sheet of paper and redo all of the tests that have been done prior, the HERA will help these healthcare organizations figure out themselves how to exchange data in a meaningful way, the way Gail was talking about, so that the information can flow digitally, securely, and it'll mean the same thing to those who get it as it meant to those who receive it, and everything is patient-focused, patient-centered.
Oliver, we've seen with other open group standards and reference architectures a certification process come to bear at some point that helps people be recognized for being adept and trained to do this sort of thing. Do you expect to have a certification process with HERA at some point?
That's a good question. Yes, the more we mature with the HERA, and the more I believe strongly, and once we have the design guidelines and the specifications and the HERA itself as a model out there, the more there will be a need, and the more health enterprises will be hungry to see in their employees and in the marketplace, think of consulting services, that they actually can apply the HERA as in the way that we have foreseen it to. And that's a perfect place where you think of certification, just to make sure that the quality of the workforce, whether it's internal or whether it's, as I said, from a servicing perspective, that they comply to what the HERA really is, and to make sure that they have understood the content and where we are with the HERA.
Great. So clearly this has applicability to payer organizations, provider organizations, government agencies, the vendors who supply pharmaceuticals or medical instruments. There's a great deal of process benefits when done properly. Enterprise architects could become certified eventually. I guess my question then is, how do we take something that has such a potential for being beneficial across the board and make it more well-known, well-understood, something that people can benefit from, take action with? So back to you, Jason. How do we get the word out? How can people who are listening to this or reading this help with that? How do we explain what we're trying to do, but get people in a bit more, fully involved?
It's a great question. It's a question that has to be considered not just before we start work, but every time we meet. And I think the answer is straightforward. First, you build something that has clear value for stakeholders in the healthcare system. That's the internal part. The external part is developing collaborative relationships with the many players that are in healthcare. I've worked in healthcare for over 30 years, and whether it's policy or whether it's private sector, there are many stakeholders. And everybody's trying to do the same or similar things. It really comes down to cost, quality, access, security. We aim to continue developing relationships with key players and showing them how, by working with them, what they're doing fits into the HERA. That we haven't had a chance to talk about the components of the HERA, which are quite simple at the top level: plan, build, plan, operate, and improve. But there are opportunities for business development, there are opportunities for operating these systems, and there are opportunities for improvement. And showing the various key movers and shakers in the healthcare system how what we're doing integrates with what they're doing will maximize the uptake of the HERA and minimize the chances that it'll sit on a shelf somewhere after it's been developed. We're very, very keen on sowing the bed for its uptake.
Oliver, I know there are also a variety of regional conferences and events around the world, some of them from the Open Group and other organizations. How important is it for people to perhaps be aware of these events, maybe take part either virtually, online, or in person? Tell us a little bit about the face time, if you will, of these events and how that can foster awareness and improvement of uptake.
Well, absolutely, and we started with the last Open Group event in Berlin, presenting the HERA, and that was the first one, and it was 3 months back, and we continue to do so. And I believe that what we see more and more, the more we develop and the more it matures, okay, the more we can show, the more it will be, the uptake will be there, and the more interest we will see. And let's face it, this is a very interesting place to be, because as I said, we're in the healthcare domain, but we also need to include things like cybersecurity, things like governance, risk compliance aspect. So we can really leverage, and we can include a lot of what we've been doing in various other initiatives with the Open Group and outside, quite frankly, and can show how we can fusion it together and make this something that is really of value. And I feel that you can feel that value for you and me as a patient, and that's where we have this direct connectivity. So I'm pretty confident that through face-to-face, through events like the Open Group events, we can spread the message.
And a real shout out to Gail and her colleagues who have been really critical in making introductions and helping to make opportunities come open to share with a much larger body what we are doing. The most recent example of this, I think, is the HIMSS meeting, which brings together 40,000 people plus every year, and there's a federal interoperability showcase, and we've been able to introduce our work and talk about our work, and most recently the HERA work in Orlando last year. And we'll look there in 2017, early this year. And we'll look forward to continuing to do that. We've collaborated with the Office of the National Coordinator, where the federal health architecture sits, with the VA, with the DOD, with CMS. There's just lots, this is all U.S.-centric what I'm mentioning, but there's lots of opportunities to not just spread the word in public for domains and public venues, but also to go to those key players who are moving the industry forward, and in some cases convince them, and in some cases simply, they're already convinced, and help them realize that that enterprise architecture does provide that structure, that template, as Gail was saying, that can help them achieve their goals.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we're almost out of time. Gail, perhaps a little look into the crystal ball. What do you expect to see and hope to see in the next few years when it comes to improvements that health reference architecture initiatives like the one at the Open Group Forum, Healthcare Forum, can provide? What do you hope to see in the next couple of years in terms of improvement?
What would I like to see happen in the next couple of years' future as it relates to the HERA is the ability to have a place where we can go from anywhere and get a glimpse of the landscape. Right now, today, it's hard to find anywhere to go where someone in the U.S. can see the great work that Oliver is doing or the people in Norway or the people in Australia unless we go to these HIMSS meetings that Jason talked about, and then you have 40,000 people and you maybe get to talk to 100 as a one-on-one conversation. I think it's really important that we have opportunities to communicate as large groups, but also the one-on-one. And yet when we're not able to communicate personally, having the reference architecture as a resource or a tool where people can go and get the information they need on their time as they have a question, that's what I would like to see in the future. Reference architecture is a good picture. It's a good discussion to have, but it has no power until it's used. My view, my goal, my hope for the future is for the HERA to get used in the future by decision makers, developers, patients even, whatever it is for it to be used and useful. So the next step would be then organizations such as FHA, or let's say some hospital organization wants to develop a new EHR system or implement a new EHR system, where that is the place where people go and say, well, let me go look at this so I have a starting place to go. And they don't have to call and get a hold of Jason, or they don't have to wait for a vendor to come along and tell them how to solve a problem. That would be my hope for the future.
I would just add one thing, if I may, and that is you can think of the HERA as a soup with three key ingredients. Key involvement of very bright people in very top-notch organizations. These are the forum members, and our regular weekly virtual calls and our quarterly meetings. Second, we really leverage on the great deep experience and production from other forums of the open group. Trusted body, neutral, and experienced. And finally, we really do build on external relationships. Those things will make the HERA be successful as a certifiable product that people can use to get their work done and do better.
Jason, perhaps you could also tee up the next event that people might be interested in attending or be aware of. It's in Amsterdam. Can you tell us more about that and when and how to get involved?
Oh, absolutely. We're very excited about our meeting in Amsterdam in October. You can go to www.opengroup.org and look under events and read about the agendas and how to sign up to go to Amsterdam. We will have involvement from folk in the U.S., Germany, Australia, Norway, and this is just in the healthcare forum and other places as well. Key members, platinum members from the open group, giving papers, having discussions, moving the ball forward, and it'll be a very productive and a fun time.
And lastly, Jason, you mentioned that you would provide your email address or perhaps our other open group email boxes, open general boxes for questions and information.
Anyone who has a question or is interested in joining, please send me, Jason Lee, an email at the following address, j.lee@opengroup.org.
So I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been discussing the latest developments in the Open Group's Healthcare Forum and how it's advancing best practices and methods for better leveraging IT in healthcare ecosystems. And we've learned how the Health Reference Architecture Initiative is standardizing IT architectures and fostering boundaryless interoperability across the healthcare industry globally. And so now, please join me in thanking our panel. We've been here with Oliver Kipf. He's the Open Group Healthcare Forum Chairman and Business Process and Solution Architect at Philips, based in Germany. Thank you, Oliver.
Thanks a lot.
We've also been here with Dr. Jason Lee, Director of the Healthcare Forum at the Open Group, and he's based in Boston. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you very much.
And we've also been here with Gail Kadfleisch. She's Director of the Federal Health Architecture at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you very much.
And lastly, a big thank you to the Open Group for sponsoring this discussion. And lastly, a big one to our audience for joining us. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at InterArber Solutions, your host and moderator. Thanks again for listening. Feel free to pass this content on to your cohorts and others in your community, and do come back next time.